today we're going to be talking about exchanges and your HR department. We'll talk a little bit about what the exchanges are, also some definitions with regards to personnel that will be working for the exchanges, and then we'll talk a little bit about some requirements with regards to the exchanges, both the exchange notice that is due by October 1st, as well as the employer coverage tool. We'll talk about what that is and what your responsibility to that is. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about your HR department and some things that you need to start considering with regards to your employees and questions you may get from them with regards to the exchange, and what your company's philosophy is going to be with regards to handling some of those matters with regards to the exchange. As a matter of course, you'll know that we have a disclaimer at the beginning of our webinars now because they are on YouTube, and so please note that the information and documentation presented here isn't intended to be legal advice in any way, and if you have issues that you think need to be addressed by your legal counsel or tax advisors, you need to go ahead and speak with them about those particular issues. This is meant to be informational only. Going forward, then we'll jump right into the exchange. This is a graphic representation of how the exchanges are supposed to work. It's very complicated. You'll see over on this end is the employer or an individual who might want to purchase services from the exchange, and there are multiple interfaces. On its face for individuals or employers, the exchange is supposed to present one real point of contact, and that is through what the law calls a navigator. There are now additional people or types of people that can be used to access the exchange, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But you can see this is sort of complicated, and while there's been a lot of press and a lot of information floating around about coverage on the exchange, there's not a lot of definitive information available to any of us about how the exchange is going to really work. And so that is still sort of up in the air, and we'll go and talk about that a little bit too. But I wanted you to see that there are a lot of moving parts, not to mention the parts that have actually been put on hold. That is the part where we talked about with regards to the delay. It delayed the penalties, but the delay itself really had to do with reporting that employers are supposed to do to the federal government, which then in turn provides that information to the federal exchange as well as state exchanges with regards to the type of coverage you might be providing your employees. And without that information, some of that will have to be provided directly from you as an employer, and we'll talk about how you will do that. So moving forward, if I can get my screen to go, let's talk about what an exchange is to begin with. So an exchange is basically an online marketplace. We're not supposed to call them exchanges now. We're supposed to call them insurance marketplaces. That's the new buzzword. I still call them exchanges. That's the way the law refers to them. That's the way we sort of got used to talking about them. But if you hear the term insurance marketplace, that's the same thing as an exchange. And basically, it's a virtual marketplace. It's sort of like eBay or e-insurance, where you can go online and get information and quotes for health coverage. The exchange opens in October of this year. It will offer products to both individuals and small employers. Small employers, again, are employers with less than 50 employees. If you are a large employer, you won't have access to an exchange policy or be able to buy coverage through the exchange until 2016. Some states may allow large employers to purchase early, but many of them were not required to do so and only put in place those products that were both for individuals and for small employers to begin with. Through the exchange, you're supposed to be able to get the following information. You're supposed to be able to, obviously shop for health insurance, but you're also supposed to be able to compare health plans. And if you remember, we talked about exchange policies and what those look like and they are referred to by metal levels, M-E-T-A-L, metal levels. And so you're supposed to be able to compare the options given between levels as well as different carrier offerings within each level and find out which plan might best suit you or your employees. In addition, it's going to help you determine whether or not you're eligible for a premium tax credit or a cost-sharing reduction, meaning financial assistance from the federal government to buy coverage on the exchange. The exchange will also have a call center, which will help to provide answers with regards to health care reform issues, not just eligibility for exchange coverage, but other questions that might come up with regards to health care reform that individuals have. And obviously, it will be available and online to help you purchase and enroll in the coverage that it's offering. While it opens up, open enrollment under the exchange begins October 1st. It has to be fully operational by January. So while it may be accepting applications, coverage doesn't actually start until the 1st of January. We talked a minute ago about the types of policies that you can find on the exchange, and again, those are the 4 metal levels. And they go by bronze, silver, gold, and platinum, and each is defined by the amount of coverage or the amount of payments that the carrier will make on benefits under the plan. So a bronze level is the lowest cost option, the lowest amount of benefits offered on the exchange, and that's a plan where the carrier covers 60% of the costs of the coverage under the plan, and then by default the individual picks up 40%. The silver plan is the next level plan. It's 70% coverage by the carrier and 30% by the individual. And then you can see they go up. Gold is 80-20, platinum is 90-10. The silver plan is the plan that is used to measure whether someone's eligible for a subsidy. So when the exchange is looking at subsidy calculations or financial assistance to individuals, they're going to be looking at calculating that eligibility based on the second lowest cost option in the silver category. And then if an individual is eligible for financial assistance, the amount they're given would cover more of a bronze plan or of the lowest cost silver plan and not cover the entire cost for a higher cost silver plan or gold or a platinum plan. So it's that silver range where the subsidies are supposed to hit to make some determinations with regards to financial assistance under the exchange. There are currently 3 types of exchange, or 3 models that are up and running, or up and running, maybe that's a little bit too optimistic, but will be up and running October 1st in the United States. The first is the state-based model, and there are 15 states, including Kentucky and Massachusetts, that actually have state-run exchanges. They're not working with the federal government. They obviously have to interact with the federal government with regards to information, with regards to wages and household incomes and things like that, but they are running the exchange themselves. There are 3 models that are sort of running a hybrid exchange model, and those are called the state-based models with FFEIT, which is federally facilitated exchange IT programs. Basically, it's a state-run exchange, but they're going to use the federal government's computer system to run the model. And then there's the federally facilitated model. That's the model that the federal government will be running through Health and Human Services. 33 states have opted to use that model, far more than the federal government anticipated. This was really the fallback, the what-if sort of model that the healthcare reform law, the Affordable Care Act, anticipated. It was really supposed to only be available in the event a state had real difficulty getting its exchange to work or didn't have the financial resources to put an exchange in place. And more of a political statement was made when 33 states said, we're not going to do anything with regards to putting a state-run model in. So you, federal government, you get to do it. And that includes Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and West Virginia. So most of the Midwest, quite frankly, is sending their employees to the federally facilitated model. And the feds are running the entire show with regards to those models. So what happens if I want coverage? How do I get to the exchange? That's the question on everyone's mind. And because it's sort of an online or cyber marketplace, the only way to get to the exchange is to get access to the online system. And you do that by finding a navigator. Healthcare.gov is the only access portal that is currently available. There are no phone numbers, no other email or internet website addresses to get to the exchange outside of healthcare.gov. And healthcare.gov is going to take you to finding a navigator, at least when the navigators have been trained and put in place. So individuals seeking coverage through an exchange, or if they want information from the exchange, will do that by finding a navigator. Navigators are non-commissioned. They don't get commission from any of the carriers. They are paid by the exchange. They're employees of the exchange. In addition to navigators, there are a couple other types of individuals that can help people get to the exchange, and we'll talk about those now real quickly. Again, navigators are the primary party that you'll use to get access to the exchange. Now, the federal government has said that they will have a fully staffed call center up and running, and that would be another way to get information about the exchange, or perhaps to find a navigator. But that call center isn't up and running, and we don't have a phone number for it. So right now we're going to have to wait till the navigators are trained and their names made public, so we know how to find them in order to get coverage on the exchange. These are the people that are going to help fill out the applications. There are applications to get coverage under the exchange, and there's additional application if you want financial assistance or subsidy under the exchange. And even though they are shorter than they originally were, if you might remember, the original individual application was 23 pages. It got shortened to 5. One of which is instructions. So it's a much shorter form now, but it still asks a lot of information from an individual in order to even start into investigating whether or not you're eligible for coverage under the exchange. These are also the people that are going to understand whether or not individuals are eligible for premium tax credits or cost-sharing reductions based on their household incomes, and whether or not they've been offered employer-sponsored coverage and those sort of things. If you are an individual in a state that has a state-based exchange, you'll also be able to talk to a non-navigator assistant. They'll basically be doing the same sort of things as navigators, but have less authority of a navigator. From all I've seen so far, it appears that they won't have the authority to submit applications, but they may have the ability to help people complete applications. But non-navigator assistants won't be found in the federally facilitated exchange, which would be in Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, West Virginia. Those exchanges, residents in those states will be using the federal exchange, and they won't have non-navigator assistants. They'll have certified application counselors. And this is part of the problem. Not only do we not have very much information about how the exchange is going to work, but we have a lot of regulation defining people, and people who are supposed to help us get to the exchange and to fill out applications, but no practical or operational information about who these people are, how we find them, how you start working with one, what kind of questions they're going to be asking you. Outside of the application, we don't know how the process is going to work. But on the federally facilitated exchange, basically anyone that isn't a navigator is going to be called a certified application counselor. And again, their primary role is education and helping complete the application, as opposed to a navigator who is actually going to submit and work with the exchange to get you coverage once the application has been completed. The other thing that's different about certified application counselors is they can be community organizations, so libraries or community action organizations can apply to be certified application counselors. So in certain communities, you might be able to go, for instance, to the library, and somebody can help you get information about the application, find out how to get online and talk to a navigator, those sort of things. That's the role of the certified application counselor. Even though when the law was first passed, it was pretty clear that agents and brokers weren't going to have a role in the exchange. That has changed since, and I think it's partly changed because um, we are so far down the road towards the exchanges and yet don't have navigators in place that, quite frankly, it's agents and brokers that understand the system and they understand how insurance works and they understand the plans that are on the exchange. And so now they are allowed to help enroll individuals and employers into exchange coverage, but only if the state has passed a law that permits them to do so. Right now in Ohio, I've only seen references to navigator training. I haven't seen agent and broker rules, although I know that Ohio is intending to allow agents and brokers to help with that process. The other thing that hasn't happened completely yet is training for these people who are going to assist with the exchange, particularly with regards to the federal exchange. We are just now seeing grants and applications being put out for people to apply to be a navigator. Never mind apply to get on the exchange, but apply to be a navigator. And so some of that training is just now going to happen. And quite frankly, you know, we're a month and a half away, 50 days, quite frankly, from the opening of the exchange. And we still don't have fully trained navigator personnel. So it's not a wonder that all of us are sitting here wondering what's going to go on and how the exchanges are going to work. I want to stop a minute because I've gotten quite a few questions. One question, our organization is located in Kentucky. We may have employees that live in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Which state do our employees go to for the marketplace? Well, they go to the marketplace based on where they reside. So if I'm an Ohio resident and I work for a Kentucky company, I will go to the federal exchange as opposed to the Kentucky exchange, unless I'm a Kentucky employer that's looking for coverage under the exchange. If I'm an individual, I will go based on where I reside. If I'm an employer, I will go based on where I'm located as an employer. So if you as a small employer are in Kentucky and you're looking for coverage for your entire group, all of your employees together on the exchange, then you would go to the Kentucky exchange. But generally speaking, individual coverage, the exchange that you go to would be based on the state in which you live. So we're going to talk a little bit more questions on the exchange notice, and we're going to talk about that in more detail here. But I wanted to go through some of the exchange rules. So we've talked about that. Remember again that the exchange opens October 1st. Open enrollment under the exchange for 2014 coverage runs from October 1st, 2013, and then continues through March of 2014. At that point, open enrollment or enrollment of any kind is supposed to cease under the exchange for 2014 coverage, and then the coverage would begin January 14th, 2014, January 1st, 2014. What we don't know is still an open question. If I enroll in the exchange in February of 2014, do I get coverage retroactively back to January 1st, or does the carrier take me as of the date I enroll? I still don't know the answer to that question. Part of the reason is because we still don't have a really clear picture of all of the policies that are going to be on the federal exchange and we know that there have been about 13 carriers approved and 200 some policies available for individuals from Ohio to the federal exchange, but we don't have the federal government's approval of those policies yet, so we're still waiting on that. So what do you tell your employees? What do we do with regards to our employees, and what information do they need before they can make some decisions about the exchange? The first thing we have to tell them is we have to give them this exchange notice. And any employer that's subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act has to provide their employee with an exchange notice. And actually the law says you have to provide them certain pieces of information about the exchange, which are listed here. One of the things I want to leave you with today is just this idea that you don't have to use the model notice. For some of you, the model notices that were released by the federal government will be helpful and the best way to create that notice. For others, it may not be, and others it may be best just to create your own notice, including this information. We'll talk about some ideas with regards to that as well. But under the law, and any employer that's subject to FLSA, which is most employers, have to provide this information, and that includes information that the exchanges exist, that they're out there, and contact information to the exchange. Again, right now, the only contact information we have with regards to the exchange is that healthcare.gov website address. That's the only information. In fact, if you look at the draft releases of the individual and family applications for coverage under the exchange, all the phone numbers have X's in them. They're all just 1-800-XXXXX because they don't have the phone numbers established yet. So you have to provide that contact information to the exchange. You have to provide a description of services that are provided by the exchange and information that explains to the employee that there's a possibility of getting financial assistance through the exchange and getting coverage under the exchange with a cost-sharing reduction, and also that if you as an employer offer coverage, which comes tax-free to them right now, that they would be losing that tax-free employer contribution. So whether or not you're making a contribution to their coverage by paying for premium, whether or not they're making a contribution to their plan right now through a Section 125 pre-tax funding mechanism, that they're going to lose those contributions to their coverage, that it will be all their money that is used to pay for that coverage if they go to the exchange. And that's something that is required to be told to them in this exchange notice, whether you create your own notice or you use the model. This is the stuff you have to tell them. So what's the best way to do that? Again, you can provide the model notice, or you can create a separate notice that basically covers the information that was on the previous slide. To help, the federal government did issue these two model notices. The first one is to be used by employer to give to their employees to whom they offer health coverage, and the other one is to be used by employers to their employers to whom they don't offer coverage. And one of the things that I think is sort of confusing, and I want to sort of make as a point at the outset here, is that there may be instances and particular employers that have to present both notices, have to create and hand out both notices, because you could have employees that you offer coverage to and employees that you don't offer coverage to. Never mind who you're supposed to and anybody who's over 30 hours. You may offer coverage to employees down to 20 hours, and you would give the model notice for an employer who offers coverage to those people, and you would have to give the notice for employees that aren't being offered coverage, the other model notice. I probably didn't make that as clear as I can, but you'll see that both of them are listed here on the slide. And there could be situations where you have to create both notices and hand them out to their respective employees, those that have coverage and those that don't. Again, the notice has to go to all employees, not all people who are eligible for coverage under your plan, or all full-time employees or all part-time employees, all employees. Unfortunately, this is the mechanism that the law is using to describe to all U.S. citizens, primarily employees, to give them information about the existence of exchanges. There isn't going to be, a huge federal email blast or a huge federal mailing where we send information out. In fact, we aren't even really seeing a lot of commercials on TV or public service ads about the exchange. It is this model notice that is really the fundamental way that information is supposed to be disseminated about the existence of the exchange. And that's why the notice has to go to every single employee, including those who aren't even eligible for your coverage. You have to get it to all your employees, part-time, full-time, temporary, permanent. Anybody that you consider an employee has to get the notice. Now, with regards to the notice, the model notice, it is the one that's used for employers for their employees that are being offered coverage is 3 pages. If it's for employees that aren't being offered coverage, it's 2 pages. We'll talk about what that means. But note that in both cases, Part A is required. And Part A is the front page of the notice. And Part A, I'm going to skip over here real quick. I'm having trouble with my mouse. I apologize. having definite problems with my mouse. Um, Part A is the front page of both model notices, and it covers all of the information we described that has to be included in um, the model notice, in the notice to your employees, outside of a couple pieces of information. One, whether or not you're offering coverage, and two, whether or not it is, if it's affordable. So if you decide you don't want to use the model notice, you can take Part A, the first page of the model notice, and use that information to create a separate form and hand that out to your employees. And I think that would meet the requirements of the law. The law itself says you don't have to use the model notice. So both notices have the same first page. That's the Part A. That's the part that talks about the existence of the exchange, the part that talks about the fact that you might be eligible for financial assistance, that if you decide to take exchange coverage, you would lose any employer contributions that are being made to your employer-sponsored health plan. When it comes to page 2 and 3, or Part B of the notice, that's where the notices are different. If we're talking about Part B for the model notice for employees who have coverage or being offered coverage, Part B talks about what that coverage is. There's a place where you can fill in the information about what eligibility is, who's eligible for coverage and who isn't. There's a place to mark, to check box that will say that your plan has minimum value, meets the minimum value standards, and is affordable. If it's the notice that is the notice to employees who are being offered coverage and therefore has a page 3, the page 3 is also optional. Page 3 is the part that tells the employee whether or not they are specifically eligible, whether or not the plan is affordable, how they can make some determinations about whether or not their household income will make them eligible for financial assistance. And this is where I think not using the model notice or using a modified model notice is something to consider. Page 3 is the equivalent of what's called the Marketplace Employer Coverage Tool, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's something that is required from the employer anyway in the event an employee goes to an exchange and is seeking financial assistance. The exchange is going to send back with the employee a form to you as their employer with questions that need to be answered about their wages and their income and the coverage that you're offering them. And since you're going to have to do that anyway in the event somebody is seeking financial assistance under the exchange, my thought is not to worry about completing page 3 on that model notice at this point. It's optional. Depending on the type of coverage you offer, you could have 3 or 4 different model notices because you have different types of coverage you're offering different employees, and that becomes very convoluted. From my perspective, the easiest thing right now to do is to try to meet the notice requirement. So we're going to get a notice out to all our employees, either using the model notice or not, with as little information as is needed to make the notice as simple as possible. Not just for you as an employer in creating it, but also for the employee in understanding it, because the employee is going to have a lot of information they're going to start trying to sort through as they decide what they want to do with regards to the exchange. And since you will have to provide the employer coverage tool information later anyway, if they do decide to go to the exchange, it seems to me that there's no real sense in attempting to create that form right now. But that's a preference by employer, and it depends on how you as an employer generally provide information to your employees. Are they used to getting everything up front and they know that things will, maybe have more pages in them, or they're used to getting things piecemeal from you depending on the situation. So those are things that you need to think about. Another thing to note on the forms, on both model notices, page 2 and page 3, if it's an offering notice, the numbering sequence on the question seems to be all off. The reason it's off is that the numbers of the questions that are on that form and on the employer coverage tool as well are meant to match up with the number of the question on the actual exchange application so that the employee doesn't get confused. If they go to the employer with an employer coverage tool and they only need the answer to question 3, they'll know that when the employee puts the answer to question 3 on the employer coverage tool, they can go back to their application and that's the answer that goes in question 3 on the application. So you'll notice that the numbering is all funky. It's not a mistake. It's so that the exchange application form and the model notice and employer coverage tool are all using the same number for the same question. Okay? So I hope that gives you a pretty good overview of where we are with the exchange notice. One of the things that you need to remember, again, that it has to go to all employees, whether you create your own or use the model, it has to go to all employees by October 1st. You don't have to give it to retirees, and you don't have to give it to COBRA participants, and that's because similar information needs to go in your COBRA notices. So if somebody goes off on COBRA after October 1st, then they're going to get this information as part of their new COBRA notices, and we're working on updating our forms to include that information. So it would be given to them that way. Anyone that you hire new after October 1st, every new hire, again, at any level, part-time, full-time, permanent, temporary, salaried, or hourly, all new hires have to get the same notice no later than 14 days from their date of hire. So this is an ongoing requirement. You have to do it first by October 1st of this year, but then as you hire people, you need to continue to give new hires that information. So again, put it in with your new hire packet, everything that you give them on that first day of work, just to make sure that you've given them that information. Distributing the notice is another important thing to take into consideration. The notice has to be distributed in the same manner that we would distribute SPDs. So remember, when we talk about summary plan descriptions or other plan documents, there's certain things we have to do. We can either hand them out, hand delivery, we can deliver them by first-class mail, or you can do it electronically if you meet those DOL electronic delivery tests. And those are the things that says, if everybody has a computer and everyone's agreed to get notice by electronic form, or you've told them that they will all be available on an employee kiosk, all those things that you may have already thought about with regards to SPDs, you could distribute the notice electronically as long as you meet that current test. But you have to make sure that it is distributed in that fashion. So maybe you put it in payroll stuffer, but you would have to make sure that everybody was actually getting payroll on that day. To make sure that that method would work. So that's pretty much where we are with regards to the notice. When we talk about the employer coverage tool, again, these two documents sort of go hand in hand. Page 3 of the model notice for an employer that's offering coverage is pretty much the same thing as the employer coverage tool. And this tool is the information that an individual is going to need to find out if they're eligible for a premium tax credit or cost-sharing reduction, basically financial assistance to get coverage under the exchange. Some of the information will have to come from their application, and some of it will have to come from you. And so when you may have employees that show up at your HR department with this employer coverage tool, where either a Navigator or somebody's sent it to them online and said, you need to have this filled out. It is a requirement that you fill that out. This is sort of the compromise that is in place because the reporting requirements have been delayed. We talked about the enforcement delay. Again, the enforcement delay was secondary to the real reason for the delay, which was that the federal government didn't have the reporting mechanisms in place to get this information from you electronically. And so because they can't do that, in order to determine if people are eligible for financial assistance, they're going to have to gather that information about whatever plan you're offering from you directly. Okay? So this is what that coverage tool asks for. It basically asks for the applicant's taxes, taxable wages, and how often they're paid. It's going to talk about their average number of hours per week. Again, we have to know about whether or not they're working 30 or more hours on average per week. They're also going to ask some ask for some information about the applicant's income if it varies from month to month, so they can make some determinations about what the average wage is with regards to their financial decisions and the calculations they're making based on household income and federal poverty levels. They're going to ask about their eligibility for coverage, their waiting periods, whether your plan has minimum value, and they're going to ask for the amount of the contribution that the employee has to pay for the lowest cost health plan that you've offered to that employee. Again, you may have decided that you're going to put a plan in place that has, substantial benefits, and it's going to cost, what it normally costs you to put in a plan that has, extensive benefits, but you're also going to put in a lowest cost option so that you don't get penalized. And so it's that lowest cost plan option contribution that the employer coverage tool is seeking information on. In addition, information that's going to be required will include some demographic information. And again, some of this may be information that the employee has to fill out. And that includes the number of people in their household and the relationships of those people. Spouses, dependent children, unmarried partners, other people that they are responsible for from a tax dependent status. They need to know who those people are. They're going to try to match that up with their federal income tax filing and find out what their real household income is. They have to know if anyone's disabled, and they have to know their citizenship. Again, they're not supposed to be providing financial assistance to anyone who is not a U.S. resident or a legal immigrant. So they're going to want to know citizenship. In part, maybe that is answered with some I-9 information, but citizenship is one of the questions. They're going to ask for their yearly income. They're going to need to know from the employee what their federal income tax deductions are. Do they own a home? What are their tax deductions so they can get a handle on their true household income? And they're going to want to know whether or not they're currently enrolled and or eligible for coverage. So those are some of the pieces of information that are on this form. And if you're an HR person thinking about this, you need to start thinking about how you're going to respond to some of those questions. It's one thing to hand out a notice. It's another thing to have people in your office asking you questions. And if you're HR people, that's how it works. People are going to come to you, particularly since it's you, us, all of us as employers that are providing this initial notice. So it's going to be natural for our employees to think that we are the ones that have information about the exchange. And so as an HR department, you need to start thinking through how you're going to answer some of these questions. Beyond providing that notice, how much information are you willing to provide your employees about the exchanges? Are you going to say, go to healthcare.gov, that's all I know? Are you going to try to give them some more information? I mean, that's a personal decision that each employer, each company needs to make. You want to be able to provide them with significant information, though, about a couple of things. One, that the individual mandate is still in place. It didn't get delayed. They may only hear news stories that says healthcare reform has been delayed, or that's what they think they hear. Again, it's important to remind employees that the individual mandate is still in place and that your plan, your employer-sponsored plan, helps them meet that requirement. Your plan is in place. If they're on your plan, they've met that requirement, they won't owe the tax. And that's an important piece of information to share with them. Because even though that delay means you don't have to report certain things, you will have to deal with their request for information from you if they decide to go to the exchange for information through that employer coverage tool. And so maybe providing some information up front will help them stay on the plan. Why is it important that they stay on the plan? I mean, for one thing, people may jump off of your plan and go to the exchange thinking they're going to get financial assistance or get coverage for free or virtually free on the exchange, because I think that there's some misconceptions about how much financial assistance is really available. And so, you've got your employees that drop off the plan and go to the exchange, and then they find out they aren't eligible for a subsidy because you provide an affordable minimum value plan. So maybe it's important to give them some information up front that keeps them from doing that. Similarly, if there are going to be lower rates on the exchange, and I'm not sure there are, but if they are, it may be for young, healthy people. But you don't want the young, healthy people dropping off your plan either, because that increases your costs on your plan as you are, collecting less contributions and covering sicker people altogether. So there's a sort of line you have to walk about how much information you want to provide to your employees up front and how much assistance you want to provide for them when they come into your office. Do you want to help them work this through, or are you going to say, you need to find a navigator, here's how you do that? In addition, there may be some things in your employment policies and handbooks that you'll need to change with regards to that. Maybe one of the things you put in your handbook is your exchange notice, so that that is something that's given to every employee when they're hired. Maybe you put in a section of your plan when you're talking about your, in your handbook, when you're talking about your plan, that talks about the new eligibility rules, full-time employees, who's eligible for coverage. Maybe you put in, again, a completed model notice so that they have that available to them. These are all things that I think we need to start thinking about as we work through, how as HR folks we're going to help our employees understand not just the exchange, but their responsibility. They're the ones that have to investigate through the exchange if they want coverage. But then we would be providing some answers to them if they are seeking financial assistance. Until we see how the exchange is really going to work and what we're really going to get back from them, I think we have to just hope for the best. So I have some questions here. I want to get through these questions before our hour is up. One of the questions, will employees be able to use FSA dollars for the exchange premium costs? And I don't believe you will. Again, that's something that you give up. When you go to the exchange as an employee, you lose your status as an individual covered under an employer-sponsored plan. You are basically buying an individual policy through the exchange. Now, that may, I'm pretty sure you do. I can definitely check on that. But I think that you would lose your eligibility for FSA contribution status under the FSA. And again, I will definitely check on that for you and get back to you. Another question, do you recommend completing the optional portion of the notice? I think that's an employer-by-employer question. Here's sort of the way I think about it. If the coverage you offer your employees is pretty much the same for everybody, the eligibility rules are the same for everyone, the coverage is the same for everyone, almost all of your employees are eligible for the coverage, then I think filling out that optional portion helps you. You can get that done in advance. You're not providing different pieces of information to different employees. If you offer multiple types of coverage and have multiple eligibilities and multiple contribution schedules, then I think it becomes a different proposition. Then I think maybe you just go with the basic information and tell your employees that if they are seeking financial assistance through the exchange, that you'll help with the employer coverage tool and in providing that information that way, because that information is also on the employer coverage tool. But again, if you're an employer that is has always made sure that you covered every single situation in advance, if you are able to, then yes, you do that. But again, these are preferences based on you as an employer, how your HR staff works with employees, maybe where all your employees are located. Maybe it's better to fill out the entire notice if all of your employees aren't in one location, and it will be more difficult for them to get the information after the fact. I think those are all things to take into consideration as you decide whether or not to fill out that optional portion of the model notice. So where do you get the model notices? If you Google, exchange model notice, they'll both come up. I can also email them to you if you need them. There's one that clearly says it's for employers who offer coverage, and one that clearly says for employers who don't offer coverage. But again, offering coverage to some employees means you might have to offer or hand out, distribute 2 notices. Unless you offer to everybody or you don't offer to anybody, those would be the situations in which you would only have to hand out 1 model. There's also another possibility where you take page 2 of the model notice and you explain in detail who's eligible for coverage and who isn't, so you can hand it out to both types of employees. And I think that would be fine as well. But again, those are available if you Google them, and I can also email them to you after the presentation is over. So that's pretty much my my presentation for today. I know we covered a lot. I think the important takeaway is that the exchanges are going forward. They will be ready in some shape or form October 1st, and open enrollment will start on that day. I think that there is no way that the federal government will not open those exchanges on October 1st, even if they're not completely ready, knowing that they don't have to issue any policies or cover anyone until January 1st. That means that those notices have to go out, and they have to go out in a situation where we have less than perfect information about the exchanges. Need to make a decision about whether you're going to use the model notice or create your own customized notice. Remember that it has to go to all your employees, and that at some point you're going to have an employee who may want information from the exchange about whether he or she is eligible for financial assistance, and as an employer you will have to complete that employer coverage tool, which basically asks the information about whether or not you are offering a plan, whether it's affordable, whether it provides minimum value, what that employee's income is, and then we'll ask information, some detailed information that the employee will need to complete with regards to his household tax situation and his dependents. So that's where we are. I will wait a few minutes, as always, to see if there are any additional questions. I want to remind you that next week is our final webinar, at least for the time being, and that has to do with the new HIPAA wellness rules, an overview of those rules. We'll talk about those rules and how we view wellness programs since the release of those final regs, as well as a little bit about wellness plans and healthcare reform and affordability, because they sort of go hand in hand, and we'll talk about that next week. Again, these are available on MedBen's YouTube channel, so if you need to replay, you can go out and listen to those recordings again. They're all out there a couple days after the broadcast the webinar is over, so they should be out by the 1st of next week. This one. Okay. Seeing no additional questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for attending. I really appreciate it. Again, if you have any specific questions, you can always call or email me. I'll be happy to provide as many answers as we have for you. So again, thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.